Snow whispered against the glass like a secret no one dared repeat. Inside the Kingsley estate, light and laughter floated beneath crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of pine and wealth. Gabriel Kingsley stood apart from it all, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand, his reflection fractured across the towering window. From the outside, he was perfection, billionaire, husband, host. But behind his steady gaze hid a loneliness that glitter couldn't disguise. The orchestra's music faltered when a deep hum rolled in from the bay. Guests turned. Through the drifting snow, a massive yacht, sleek, white, and impossible to ignore, sliced toward the dock. Aurora. The name hit him like memory and regret combined. Then she appeared, Linda, her hair caught in the wind, 3 small children at her side, their faces hauntingly familiar. For the first time in years, Gabriel realized he had lost what mattered most. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story will leave you breathless. Snowflakes clung to the glass doors as the music collapsed into silence. The Christmas Eve Gala, once the crown of Gabriel Kingsley's empire, now stood in shambles. Guests whispered behind champagne flutes, phones raised discreetly, recording every tremor of the billionaire's downfall. The orchestra had stopped mid-note, and the only sound was the wind pushing against the mansion's glass walls. Linda stood framed in the doorway, calm, radiant, untouched by the scandal swirling around her. Her coat shimmered faintly with sea mist, her eyes carrying that same quiet fire he'd once fallen in love with. Beside her stood 3 children, triplets, no older than 6, their small hands clutching each other, wide-eyed and innocent. Sarah's voice broke first. Gabriel, who are they? Her tone was brittle, her smile cracking like porcelain. She didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she turned and walked up the staircase, the hem of her silver gown trailing behind her like a fading dream. The cameras flashed. The guests murmured. Someone gasped as Linda stepped forward, her expression steady. "You wanted a Christmas surprise," she said softly, her voice carrying across the marble floor. "I thought I'd bring you 3. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gabriel's chest tightened. His throat felt dry, words dying on his tongue as his eyes darted between the children. The boy with his sharp jawline, the girl with his mother's eyes, and the quiet one who looked exactly like him at that age. "Why now?" he managed to whisper. "Why here?" Linda's gaze didn't waver. "Because they've been asking about their father. I thought it was time they saw him, even if he doesn't recognize them." Something inside him cracked. He took a half step forward, his hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," she said. "You weren't listening." A quiet voice echoed from the stairs. Sarah again, standing halfway up now, mascara streaked across her cheeks. "You never do." Then she was gone. The party dissolved like mist. Guests drifted toward the exits, murmuring behind their hands, pretending not to stare. The media lights outside flickered like lightning. By the time Gabriel turned back, Linda was gone too. Only the faint scent of sea salt remained, and 3 untouched glasses of champagne glinting beneath the chandelier. He stood there long after the last guest left, the sound of the ocean humming beyond the windows. 1,000 moments replayed in his head, the phone calls he never returned, the birthdays missed, the silence that had become his companion. His reflection in the window fractured again, this time not by the lights, but by tears he didn't want to admit had fallen. He remembered the beginning. A small apartment by the coast, the smell of oil paint and salt in the air. Linda laughing as she painted with bare feet, a streak of blue across her cheek. Gabriel hunched over a sketchpad, designing his first ship, the one that would one day carry their dreams. They had no money, no fame, only each other. He'd promised her everything. One day, I'll build us a home by the sea. One day, you'll never have to worry again. Those promises began to rot the moment success found him. Late nights became normal. Dinners were canceled. Anniversaries forgotten. His phone never stopped buzzing. Investors, journalists, partners. And when Linda told him she was pregnant, his phone buzzed again before he could even reply. He answered it. Her eyes had filled with disbelief, then tears. "You'll regret this," she'd said softly. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But someday, you'll look around and realize the world you built doesn't have a place for love." He didn't believe her. Not then. Now, years later, her words hung in the air like prophecy. Gabriel found himself standing in the empty ballroom, shattered glass crunching underfoot. He bent down, picking up a single champagne flute, cracked but unbroken, and stared into its fractured reflection. The room was silent. The empire he'd built, his ships, his boardrooms, his millions, meant nothing. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering the path Linda had walked moments ago. Somewhere in the distance, he heard laughter, faint, childlike, carried by the wind from the docks. He turned toward it instinctively, but the sound faded before he could move. He stood there alone, a king in ruins, surrounded by everything except the one thing that mattered. And for the first time in his life, Gabriel Kingsley didn't know what to do next. The morning after the gala arrived cold and heavy, the kind of morning where the world seems to hold its breath. Snow blanketed the marble terraces of the Kingsley estate, muffling all sound. The orchestra was gone, the guests had vanished, and even the sea, usually restless, seemed subdued. Only the echo of last night's humiliation lingered. Gabriel hadn't slept. The whiskey on his desk sat untouched, the amber glow catching the gray light creeping through the windows. His reflection looked older, smaller somehow, swallowed by the emptiness of his own creation. Every room in the mansion, every expensive piece of art, every gleaming surface, felt colder than it had ever been. Down by the marina, faint laughter rose above the wind. Children's laughter. He stepped outside, coat pulled tight, and followed the sound toward the docks. There he saw them, Ethan, Liam, and Emma, chasing one another across the wooden planks. Linda stood nearby, coat fluttering in the sea breeze, speaking quietly with one of the yacht's crew. She turned when she sensed him approaching. "I thought you'd still be inside," she said, her tone even. "I was," he replied. It felt emptier than usual. He held out a tray awkwardly, 3 mugs of cocoa, steam curling into the winter air. "I thought they might like something warm." Ethan, the oldest by a minute or two, looked up with cautious curiosity. "Do you build ships?" he asked, eyes wide as he glanced toward the shipyard beyond the docks. Gabriel nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes, but none as beautiful as yours." The boy grinned, not understanding the weight of what he'd said, and reached for a mug. Liam followed, while Emma, the smallest, studied Gabriel for a long moment before taking hers. Her hands were so tiny he instinctively bent down, steadying the cup so she wouldn't spill. "Careful," he murmured. "I'm not a baby," she said, her tone firm but soft, and he smiled despite the ache in his chest. Linda watched from a few steps away. Something flickered across her expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a quiet acceptance that maybe he was trying. "Let them visit," Gabriel said. "Just for the morning. The house. It's too quiet." Linda hesitated, then nodded. "Only for the morning." The shipyard loomed like a cathedral of steel and salt. Cranes towered above the water. Workers moved methodically between vessels in progress, sparks flying from welding torches like falling stars. Usually, Gabriel felt pride walking through here, the hum of creation, the scale of his empire. But today it felt different. The children walked ahead, their voices echoing. Ethan marveled at the engines. Liam peered into an open hull, whispering, "It's like a whale." Emma ran her fingers along a polished railing, whispering a quiet, "Wow." The workers noticed them quickly, some pausing to greet their employer with cautious nods. But when they saw the children at his side, something unspoken passed through the crowd. A rare, human softness in a place built on order and efficiency. One foreman, an older man with weathered hands, smiled. "You've got good helpers today, sir." Gabriel almost corrected him, then stopped. "Yes," he said instead. "The best I've ever had." Linda trailed behind, her gaze scanning the yard. "I remember when you dreamed of this," she said quietly. "Back when it was just sketches and sleepless nights." He swallowed hard. "I thought if I built something big enough, it would fill the empty parts." "Did it?" she asked. He didn't answer. Inside one of the workshops, the children wandered between workbenches littered with blueprints and tools. Emma stopped suddenly, her eyes catching on something half buried beneath old papers, a small, rusted toy ship. She lifted it carefully, brushing away dust. "What's this?" she asked. Gabriel froze. He walked over slowly, taking the ship from her hands. The toy was crude, unevenly carved, its sails broken, but he recognized it instantly. He'd made it years ago, in a moment of rare stillness. A gift for the child he thought he'd one day have. He'd built it, then tucked it away when success came calling. He hadn't seen it since. Emma tilted her head. "Did you build it?" He nodded. "A long time ago." "For who?" The question struck deep. He looked at her, this small, curious face, and said softly, "I didn't know then." She smiled faintly, placing the ship in his hand. "Then maybe it was always for me." They left the workshop and walked toward the end of the dock. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, the sky heavy with clouds. Linda stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes reflecting both the sea and the years between them. "You missed a lot," she said quietly. "Birthdays, first steps, questions I couldn't answer." "I know," he replied, voice low. "And I can't take it back. But maybe I can start showing up now." "Showing up isn't enough, Gabriel. Not for them." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "I used to think love was a distraction. My father taught me that. He said real men don't waste time on feelings." Linda's voice softened. "And how did that work out for him?" Gabriel's jaw tightened. "He died alone. I told myself I'd never be like him." She looked at him, really looked. "And yet here you are." The truth stung. He turned away, staring at his reflection in the dark water, his empire mirrored back at him, vast, powerful, hollow. The cranes stood like monuments to ambition, the ships gleamed like ghosts. He saw himself in that reflection, a man surrounded by everything, but filled with nothing. Behind him, the children laughed again, the sound pure and untamed, rising over the rhythm of the sea. For the first time in years, Gabriel didn't think about his empire, his shareholders, or his name. He thought about that laughter, and how much of life he had missed chasing something that could never love him back. He stood there, watching the reflection ripple, until even the outline of his empire began to fade. The sea was quieter that night, as though the world itself had paused to listen. The yacht Aurora swayed gently against the dark water, its deck lit by a ghostly wash of moonlight. Inside, the hum of the engines had stilled, and the only sounds came from below, the rhythmic breathing of 3 small souls sleeping in safety. Gabriel stood by the railing, his reflection merging with the night sky. Somewhere below, in one of the lower cabins, Linda moved softly, her silhouette passing through the pale glass like a memory given form. He waited, unsure whether courage or guilt had brought him there. When she emerged, she was wrapped in a soft robe, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. No diamonds, no designer facade, just the woman he had once loved so fiercely that he mistook possession for devotion. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. His voice trembled despite the practiced calm he wore at board meetings, in interviews, in every room but this one. "But I had to see you, without the crowd, without the noise." Her gaze flickered toward the window, where the faint outline of the Kingsley estate glimmered across the bay. "You've built yourself a kingdom, Gabriel. You don't need anything else." He laughed once, dry and short. "A kingdom doesn't keep you warm." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint creak of the ship. Then his eyes fell to the small table beside her, a mug half full of cocoa, and beside it, a child's drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. The 4th stood apart. His chest tightened. "You moved on well," he said, the bitterness slipping out before he could stop it. Linda's expression didn't waver. "No, I survived well." The words hit harder than anger ever could. For a long moment, neither spoke. Gabriel turned his back to her, staring out at the endless horizon. "I didn't know," he said finally. "Linda, I swear to you, I didn't know." Her breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. "I was buried in work. Every letter, every call, I thought it was noise. Distractions. My father used to tell me that love makes men weak. That if I wanted to be great, I had to stay hungry." His voice cracked. "I didn't realize I was starving myself." Linda crossed her arms, but her hands shook. "You talk about hunger, Gabriel. But I remember the silence. The nights I waited. The letters I sent. The hospital room where I gave birth alone." He flinched, and she continued, not out of cruelty, but exhaustion. "I wrote to you for months. You never answered. I thought maybe you were dead. Then one morning, a box arrived, with a contract. You'd signed the divorce papers. No note. No call." He swallowed, his throat tight. "That wasn't me. That was my legal team. They told me." "They told you what you wanted to hear," she cut in sharply. "That I'd moved on. That it was easier this way." Her voice trembled, not from rage but from the weight of remembering. "When I realized you'd chosen your empire over us, I stopped waiting. I sold everything I could, took the yacht my uncle left me, and built a life, not for me but for them." She gestured toward the lower cabins, where faint laughter still echoed in dreams. Gabriel pressed a hand to his temple, the ache of years finally catching up. "If I had known." She stared at him, tears glinting like frost. "If you had known, you'd have sent an assistant, a lawyer, maybe a check. You didn't need a family, Gabriel. You needed followers." He looked at her then, really looked at the woman who once believed in him, at the strength he'd mistaken for defiance. And for the first time, he felt small in the presence of his own mistakes. The yacht rocked gently. Outside, the tide lapped against the hull, steady and unfeeling. "I want to know them," he whispered. "Please." Linda didn't move. Her shoulders rose and fell as she steadied herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, the kind of softness born from surviving heartbreak. "They're good kids. Curious. Kind. They ask about their father sometimes." She paused, meeting his gaze. "Don't hurt them with promises you can't keep." He nodded, a tear slipping down unnoticed. "I don't want to promise. I just want a chance." For a long while, she said nothing. Her hand brushed the table, fingertips tracing the drawing again. "They don't know what you look like," she said quietly. "Maybe that's a blessing. They see the world as big and kind. I don't want to change that yet." Gabriel closed his eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," she replied, the word firm but not cruel. "Because forgiveness isn't what you need. You need to feel what you've built, the cost of it." He followed her gaze to the window again. The reflection of his mansion shimmered across the black water, vast, powerful, and empty. His empire had always been a monument to his father's lessons. Now it looked like a prison. "I used to think legacy meant what you leave behind," he murmured. "But maybe it's who you leave behind." Linda looked at him, a flicker of the man she once loved hidden beneath the ruins. "The children will be awake early," she said finally. "You can have breakfast with them before we sail." Gabriel exhaled, the first hint of hope breaking through the grief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said softly. "Just show up. That's all they'll ever need." He stood there long after she disappeared below deck. The moonlight traced his features, the man who had conquered everything except himself. In the stillness, he saw his reflection distorted by the gentle sway of the sea. Beside it lay the faint glimmer of 3 small toys floating in a basket, reminders of the family he'd missed, the years he'd traded for ambition. The waves whispered against the hull, carrying his silent vow into the night. "This time, I will not look away." Morning rose pale and cold, the kind of winter light that seemed to carry both promise and farewell. Frost glittered along the dock, turning every plank into a mirror of memory. The Aurora was ready to depart, her silver hull gleaming beneath the weak December sun. Crew members moved quietly, their boots thudding softly against the wood, as if they, too, sensed the fragility of what was unfolding. Gabriel stood at the edge of the pier, hands buried deep in the pockets of his coat. He watched Linda give instructions to the captain, her composure perfect as ever. Yet he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath caught whenever the children's laughter rose above the wind. Ethan and Liam raced along the dock, their coats billowing behind them like tiny sails. They carried sticks they'd found, pretending to sword fight, their joy unburdened by adult regret. Emma trailed behind them, her curls catching flakes of snow, her small boots crunching in rhythm. Gabriel smiled faintly, a fragile, unfamiliar curve that felt both foreign and right. He'd spent his life commanding boardrooms, dictating markets, deciding fates. But this, watching them laugh, was a world he couldn't control, only cherish. "Morning, Mr. Kingsley," Ethan called, waving a stick like a salute. "Morning, Captain," Gabriel replied, his voice warm but shaky. He knelt beside a thermos and 3 mugs he'd brought. Cocoa again, this time with marshmallows. "Peace offering," he said as the boys ran over, curiosity gleaming in their eyes. Liam wrinkled his nose. "It's sweet." Gabriel chuckled. "That's the idea." They drank, their laughter echoing over the water. The wind picked up, scattering flakes across the dock like confetti. For a moment, time folded in on itself, No past, no empire, no regret. Just warmth. Then Ethan looked up at him, his tone curious, innocent. "Do you build ships?" Gabriel hesitated, the question too sharp in its simplicity. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his throat tight, "but none as beautiful as yours." The boys laughed, not understanding the weight of his words. But Emma, quiet and watchful, tilted her head. She had Linda's eyes, soft but unyielding, the kind that saw what others missed. When the call came for boarding, the boys dashed back to the yacht, shouting goodbyes. Gabriel waved, heart thudding harder than it should. He turned to find Emma still standing there, one small hand clutching a toy boat, the same rusted model she'd found in the shipyard the day before. She looked up at him, her voice a whisper against the cold. "Are you my daddy?" The question sliced through him, not with pain, but revelation. Everything stopped. The breeze, the sound of the sea, even the pulse of the world seemed to hold its breath. Snow drifted softly between them, falling in delicate spirals. Gabriel dropped to his knees, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time in his life, he didn't think about what to say. He just told the truth. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling. "Yes, I am." Emma blinked, her lashes dusted with snowflakes. Then, without hesitation, she threw her small arms around his neck. Gabriel froze, afraid that moving would break the moment, but then his hands rose, slow and certain, holding her as if she were made of glass and light. Ethan and Liam turned at the sound of her laugh, pure, bright, free, and ran back, shouting in excitement. "Emma, what are you doing?" "She found Daddy!" she cried, joy bubbling from her like a secret too wonderful to contain. The boys stopped short, looking from her to Gabriel. Then something in their faces shifted. Recognition, maybe, or instinct. In the next heartbeat, they were both in his arms too, a tangle of laughter and tiny hands. Gabriel held them all, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could feel the thud of 3 small hearts against his chest, and something inside him, cold and rigid for years, finally broke. The dock, the sea, the world around him blurred until only the warmth remained. Linda turned from the yacht, startled by the sound. She froze mid-step, one hand pressed to her mouth. For a second, she seemed caught between disbelief and surrender. The sight before her, Gabriel, kneeling in the snow, arms full of their children, cracked something she had spent years fortifying. The man who once measured life in profit and power now looked smaller, human, real. He looked up at her, eyes wet. She tried to hold his gaze but failed. Tears slipped free before she could stop them. The years apart, the pain, the fear of hope, it all swirled together into something too raw to name. From the mansion window high above, Sarah watched. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the glass, eyes wide and hollow. She had spent years trying to become indispensable to Gabriel, the perfect partner in business, the elegant companion at every gala. Yet in that instant, she saw what she had never possessed, the unguarded, uncalculated love of a man rediscovering his soul. Outside, the snow thickened. The air shimmered with cold and quiet awe. Gabriel rose slowly, still holding one child in each arm, Emma clinging to his coat. "I missed so much," he whispered, almost to himself. Linda's voice carried softly across the wind. "Don't make promises you can't keep." He looked at her, not as a man used to winning, but as one who finally understood what loss meant. "This time," he said, his voice steady, "I intend to keep every one." Linda hesitated, then nodded once. Her eyes glistened, reflecting both pain and a fragile thread of belief. She turned back toward the yacht. The children ran ahead of her, laughing, calling for him to follow. He didn't. Not yet. He stood there, watching as the Aurora drifted away into the mist, its white hull fading into the morning haze. The rising sun split across the horizon, painting the sky in gold and pale fire. Gabriel remained on the dock long after the ship disappeared. Behind him, the mansion loomed, vast, silent, and empty. Before him, the sea shimmered with the faint trail of a departing family. He knew, as dawn broke fully, that this was either the beginning of redemption, or the last chance he'd ever have to earn it. The mansion had never been so silent. Where once laughter, music, and ambition filled its halls, now there was only the low hum of emptiness. The grand staircase, the one that had seen guests in tuxedos and champagne flutes just weeks ago, stood lifeless beneath the winter light. The scent of pine from the discarded Christmas tree lingered faintly, a ghost of a celebration that had turned into reckoning. Sarah was gone. Her designer clothes and polished heels had vanished overnight, leaving only a faint perfume trail and a note that read, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Gabriel didn't read it twice. He didn't need to. He knew she wasn't cruel, just tired of living in a house built for appearances. The tabloids had done what they always did. Kingsley scandal rocks holiday gala. The billionaire's secret family. Every headline was a mirror of what Gabriel had spent years avoiding, himself. He fired the PR team that told him to deny everything. He canceled every flight, every board meeting, every speech. The empire could wait. For once, he needed to sit in the ruins he'd built. By the third day, the silence had started to speak. He sat in the library, the room Linda once painted as her favorite. The same leather chairs, the same fireplace that still bore the faint scorch marks from the night of their confrontation aboard Aurora. The flames flickered weakly now, barely alive. He stared into them, watching how they tried, stubbornly, almost painfully, to keep burning. He recognized that struggle. Beside him sat a small black phone, not his current one, but the old model he'd found in a drawer while clearing out his desk. He didn't remember the password, but when he finally guessed it, their wedding date, the screen came to life. Dozens of old voicemails blinked red. All from Linda. He listened. Her voice came soft at first, uncertain. "Hey, it's me. I know you're busy, but I wanted to tell you the doctor says everything's fine. I wish you'd been there." Then later another. "Gabriel, I'm at the hospital. They're coming early. I thought maybe you'd want to know." The next one was shorter. "They're beautiful. All three. You'd love them if you saw them." Then silence for a few seconds, followed by a shaky exhale. "You used to tell me the sea reminded you of hope. I don't see it that way anymore. It just reminds me of waiting." Gabriel's breath caught. He didn't make it to the end of the next message. His hands trembled too much to hold the phone. He leaned forward, pressing his palms against his face. The sound that escaped him wasn't the confident voice of a tycoon or a man used to winning. It was broken, quiet, the sound of someone who'd finally realized what all his success had cost. For hours, he sat there, listening to the crackle of the fire and the faint hum of the sea outside. Memories slipped through like shadows. The smell of paint in their old apartment, Linda's laughter when he told her they'd sail the world someday, the way she'd look at him before ambition hardened his gaze. The guilt was suffocating, but beneath it, faintly, stubbornly, there was something else. Desire. Not for redemption in headlines or public apology, but for something simpler, harder, to learn. He whispered it aloud, as if testing the words for truth. "I don't know how to be a father." The flames dimmed, crackled, then sparked again, catching on a fresh piece of wood he hadn't realized had fallen in. He stared at it, the glow warming his tired face. "But I want to learn," he said softly. The fire answered with a small, steady roar. Outside, the wind howled along the cliffs. The sea was restless, endless, but for the first time, Gabriel didn't feel small before it. He felt called. Tomorrow, he would find Aurora again. Not as Gabriel Kingsley, the man with fleets and fortunes, but as the man who once loved a woman who painted mornings by the sea and believed in his dreams before he did. He would find her. He would find them. And this time he would listen. The morning fog hung low over the marina, softening the edges of Aurora as it rocked gently against the dock. Gabriel's hands, once steady in boardrooms and negotiations, were awkward and unfamiliar as he gripped the railing. Today, he wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the man whose name had dominated magazines and headlines. Today, he was just a father. The gangway lowered, and the triplets appeared first as cautious shadows, peeking around the corner of the yacht. Ethan, the oldest, narrowed his eyes, assessing. Liam shuffled behind him, a grin barely restrained. And Emma, small and hesitant, held tight to Linda's hand. "Dad," she whispered, her voice tentative. Gabriel froze. Time seemed to stretch, the fog swallowing everything else. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Yes," he said softly, voice trembling but true. "I'm here." At first, the children stayed close to Linda, glancing back at him like wary little sentinels. But the tension eased when he knelt, bringing himself to their level. He offered a hand, nothing grand, nothing rehearsed, just a gesture of presence. Ethan approached first, then Liam, finally Emma. Their fingers brushed his, tentative contact growing into trust. The day unfolded in ordinary miracles. Paper boats sailed across shallow fountains. Flour dusted the floor as they baked cookies, giggling when Gabriel accidentally dumped sugar on his nose. Pencils scribbled across coloring pages. Homework exercises punctuated by whispered guidance and soft laughter. Every small smile, every crooked drawing, was a balm, stitching his fractured heart together piece by piece. Linda watched from the galley, silent, arms crossed, yet her eyes softened in a way that told him more than words ever could. She saw him stumble, recover, and persist. She saw the man he had been break apart, and the one he was becoming coalesce with each shared laugh. Later, when the triplets were occupied with a puzzle on the deck, Gabriel's gaze wandered toward the cabin. Something glimmered beneath the corner of his old office desk, a folded envelope, yellowed with age, its wax seal faint but intact. He picked it up with reverent hesitation, his fingers trembling as they brushed the initials LK. The letter had been there all along. Never opened. Never ignored by accident. A relic of a past he had abandoned, left to gather dust while he chased a life built on steel, glass, and profit. He unfolded it carefully, the paper crackling like dry leaves. Linda's handwriting, elegant, deliberate, tender, leapt from the page. "Gabriel," it began. "I write this not because I think you'll read it today or tomorrow, but because I have to let you know what I've carried. I loved you. I still do, in ways I cannot name without trembling. I loved the life we dreamed of, the mornings we planned by the sea, the family we were meant to become. But I watched you chase ambition as if it were the only truth, and I learned that waiting for someone else's heart is a slow unraveling. I have our children now, and they are bright, beautiful, whole, yet they deserve more. You could have been there. You could have chosen us instead of the empire. And maybe one day, if you truly see this, you will understand that redemption is not in words, but in action." Gabriel's throat tightened. He closed his eyes, feeling decades of absence compress into a single painful heartbeat. His guilt, sharp and relentless, threatened to overwhelm him, yet beneath it there was clarity, a path he hadn't walked before, one that demanded courage, humility, and presence. He tucked the letter close to his chest and rose, scanning the deck. The children were building a makeshift sailboat from scraps of wood, laughing as it wobbled across a shallow pool. Their joy was unguarded, radiant, and entirely of their own making. Gabriel stepped forward, feeling the weight of his past slip incrementally from his shoulders. He knelt beside them, guiding their hands, teaching patience instead of deadlines, listening instead of commanding. Every corrected mistake, every clumsy embrace, felt like reclaiming a fragment of a life he had almost lost forever. From the galley, Linda's gaze lingered on him. No words passed, yet in her expression was the recognition of transformation. Not perfection, not a flawless gesture, just the presence of a man willing to face the consequences of his choices and commit, not merely promise. By the time the sun had climbed high enough to glint off the yacht's polished rails, Gabriel understood the revelation in its simplest, truest form. Love was not a transaction. Power was not a substitute. Success had no meaning without connection. And he had them, the three small beings who carried pieces of himself he had never before allowed to matter. Today he would be there for them. Tomorrow he would continue. No speeches, no headlines, just presence, care, and the silent vow to let action speak where ambition had failed. He glanced at Linda, who returned the look with a faint, approving nod. No words were necessary. He had been given the chance to rebuild, to reclaim what truly mattered. And this time, he would not falter. The letter, still in his hand, felt less like a relic and more like a key, unlocking a future not defined by wealth or power, but by something far more enduring. Love, responsibility, and the fragile, luminous gift of being present for the family he once let slip away. The crisp winter air carried the scent of salt and steel as Gabriel guided the triplets down the polished gangway of the Aurora 2. The shipyard had never seemed so alive, though it had always hummed with machines and ambition. Today, it pulsed with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the sticky warmth of cookie-smeared hands. "Is this really ours?" Ethan asked, eyes wide as they approached the gleaming hull, its new paint catching the morning sun. "Not ours alone," Gabriel said, kneeling to Emma's level. "All of ours. Yours, mine, and Mom's." The children circled the ship in awe, their fingers tracing the polished rails, their voices bouncing against the metal like music. Liam pointed to the bow, squinting. "Can we name it?" Gabriel smiled, a soft, genuine curve he hadn't worn in years. "It already has a name, Aurora 2. A reminder of where we came from, and where we're going." The christening ceremony was simple but resonant. No champagne for the press, no scripted speeches. The triplets each pressed their small hands to the hull and watched Gabriel break a bottle against the side. The hull trembled with the sound, and for a moment, the industrial clamor fell away. Only the children's laughter, mingled with the distant crash of the sea, filled the air. Reporters hovered at the perimeter, cameras poised, but Gabriel did not glance their way. Headlines no longer mattered. Presence did. He watched the children beam, their excitement raw and unfiltered, and he felt something inside him shift entirely. He had spent decades chasing admiration from strangers, but this, their delight, their trust, was infinitely more valuable. Linda arrived quietly, standing at a distance as she watched the scene unfold. Gabriel caught her gaze, offering a small nod. She walked closer, approaching the dedication plaque engraved near the ship's bow. "For those who light our way home." Her eyes softened. She read it aloud, voice barely above a whisper. "For those who light our way home." Her glance returned to him, and she saw not the billionaire she once knew, but the man who had come to understand what truly mattered. Gabriel took her hand gently. "I can't undo the years I lost," he said. "But I can start here with them. And with you." Linda studied him, searching for false notes, but found none. His hand didn't tremble with charm or calculation. It trembled with honesty. For the first time, action spoke louder than words. She allowed a faint, approving smile, a hint that trust could begin to rebuild. Later, Gabriel led the triplets through the shipyard, showing them the cranes, the docked vessels, and even the office where he once signed contracts late into the night. But instead of numbers and spreadsheets, they focused on his stories of ships built for adventure, explorations, and families who trusted the sea. He noticed the workers pausing, some smiling knowingly. They had seen the change as well. The man who had once measured success in steel and contracts now measured it in smiles, presence, and tiny hands gripping his. When they returned to the office, Gabriel surprised Linda by presenting her with the paperwork to become co-owner of a charitable foundation created in the triplets' names. "I want them to know," he said, "that family and community matter as much as any empire. And you've earned this." Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it, eyes glistening. "I never thought I'd see the day," she said softly. The sea, once a boundary between ambition and love, now mirrored their newfound connection. Sunlight sparkled off the waves, glinting on the polished bow of Aurora II. Gabriel stood between Linda and the children, the trio holding his hands, a small human bridge across the vast waters. He watched the triplets' laughter echo across the docks, the sound carrying further than any applause he had ever sought. For the first time, the weight of his empire felt light, and the space it had created for family felt full. As the day drew to a close, Gabriel lingered on the deck, watching Emma carefully balance a small toy boat on the waves. Ethan and Liam chased each other, shouting gleeful warnings about capsized vessels. He realized he hadn't felt this present, this alive, in decades. Linda stepped beside him quietly, her hand brushing his. "You're learning," she said. "I am," he admitted. "And I will keep learning. Every day. With them, with you. If you'll let me." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of patience, forgiveness, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Gabriel glanced out toward the horizon, the sea glimmering, the wind soft against his face. The ocean had always been vast, intimidating, and unforgiving, but today it felt more like a partner than an obstacle. It carried not distance but connection, reflecting the light of hope and the small victories of reclaimed family moments. The cameras captured the scene, flashes of light darting like tiny stars, but Gabriel didn't notice. He had stopped performing for the world. He was living for the people who mattered most. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in amber and rose, he understood fully that the life he had built for power could never replace the life he could build with love. The plaque glinted in the sunlight once more, "For those who light our way home." And in that reflection, Gabriel saw not the empire he had ruled, but the family he had finally found. A soft glow filled the Kingsley estate, the kind of glow that came not from chandeliers or crystal, but from laughter and warmth. Snow blanketed the gardens in thick, unbroken layers, muting the sounds of the morning while reflecting the soft amber light spilling from the kitchen windows. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. The triplets dashed about in tiny slippers, their voices a symphony of excitement and familiarity. Gabriel moved among them with surprising ease, flipping pancakes and stirring batter, a dusting of flour clinging to his sleeves. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching his father's concentration with wide, admiring eyes. "Dad, are you really a chef too?" he asked, the hint of a grin tugging at his lips. Gabriel laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to echo through the estate. "I'm learning," he said. "But you three are the teachers." Emma, perched on a stool, clutched a small wooden boat she had painted the night before. "Can we sail it later?" she asked, eyes bright. "Of course," he replied, kneeling beside her to examine the delicate brushstrokes. "Every boat deserves its journey." Linda entered quietly, a tray of hot cocoa in hand, her presence a calm counterpoint to the joyful chaos. She watched Gabriel interact with the children, her lips curling in amusement. He caught her glance and offered a flour-smeared smile. "I still don't deserve this," he admitted softly, brushing flour from his hands. Linda shook her head gently, setting down the cocoa. "Maybe. But you're here. That's what they'll remember." Her eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of past grievances seemed to melt away in the warmth of the kitchen. The triplets clambered onto chairs, eager to taste their father's breakfast. Liam held up a pancake triumphantly. "Best one yet," he declared. Gabriel winked, ruffling his hair, feeling a pride he had never known in boardrooms or financial reports. Later, the family moved toward the windows, drawn by the sparkling morning light reflecting off the frozen sea. Outside, Aurora too glided across the horizon, its polished hull catching the first rays of the sun. The triplets pressed their hands to the glass, their faces lighting up as they watched the ship that had become a symbol of home and connection. Gabriel stood behind them, arms resting lightly on their shoulders. He breathed in the crisp air drifting through the slightly open window, feeling the subtle rhythm of the ocean and the quiet strength of the ship that bore their shared memories. In that moment, the weight of his past, the years of absence, the lost birthdays, the quiet dinners he had missed, felt heavy but surmountable. Linda joined them at the window, her fingers brushing his. "They've got you now," she said, a soft certainty in her voice. "Not the man you were, but the one you are today." Gabriel looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not a reflection of regret but a promise. The year had changed everything. The empire he had built no longer measured him. The moments he lived with his children did. He could not erase the past, but he could create a present that mattered. As the triplets laughed and ran to the door, ready to run outside to the snow and sail their wooden boats, Gabriel felt a rare stillness. It was not the absence of noise or responsibility. It was the presence of what mattered. Love. Family. Trust rebuilt, step by step. Gabriel's eyes softened as he watched his family, the man who had once measured worth in assets now measuring it in laughter and presence. A gentle smile tugged at his lips, one that spoke of peace, redemption, and the quiet courage it took to choose love every day. The snow continued to fall gently, the sea sparkled with promise, and the house glowed, not with grandeur, but with life reclaimed. The past still whispered, but Gabriel had learned how to coexist with it. Sometimes, light doesn't erase the darkness, it simply teaches you how to live within it. If this story touched you, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.